On the way to the crime scene. It's difficult to get my head into the space of crime when the sun floats golden through the trees that border the winding road. Though road is probably being generous. Out this far from the town, the concrete has surrendered to the bounty of nature that dominates the area. The weathered track is blooming with bursts of green and yellow weeds that force themselves through the cracks, and the trees which stand sentinel either side have begun to crawl out. They create an obstacle course as I drive, the edges of the road eroded away to grass. In some way, it's amazing to see how powerful nature can be. In other ways, it's seriously uncomfortable to hit a pothole that makes your teeth crash together. Eventually, I wind my way around into a completely forested driveway. Jostling down the track, I come to a stop beside Tina's police car, as well as two other cars, all parked up on the makeshift driveway next to a house nestled into the trees. As soon as I step out, I'm hit by the intense pine scent of the trees which soar overhead. They're so tall they almost give me vertigo as I try to follow their trunks, their bushy treetops stretching for the clouds that bubble against the bright blue summer sky. I follow alongside a small, softly babbling brook, which mazes down one side of the property. Its tranquility almost lulls me closer as my body aches with exhaustion, but I resist its call and plod over the springy mud ground towards the property. The crime scene tape flaps like ribbons in the gentle breeze. I stop beside it, not having to wait long until Tina strides up to me. Any details? I ask as my gaze passes over the scene. I'm surprised a kidnapper would manage to find a house in the first place. Its wooden beams and grey stone walls blend into the scenery so well they're practically part of the forest. Even the gable roof steeples high overhead as though in competition with the towering firs around it. The house belongs to the Jeffersons. Tina pauses, swallowing visibly and taking a breath. Their teenage daughter, Addie, was kidnapped last night. My stomach sinks at the news. Anything else? Her parents, Isa and Mark, were home at the time, but she tilts her head to look towards the house with a frown. They're being cagey on details. There's no blood anywhere, but a lot of destruction. So, no injuries. I survey the property again. Whatever happened inside certainly doesn't show outside. She shakes her head. Apparently they tried to fight the kidnapper and were knocked out by him, but apart from that, no. Him? I snap my focus back to her. Definitely male? Tina gives a slow nod. I'll be out here if you need anything. She heads off towards the tape, and I notice her hands shake as she grips her notepad. I don't linger before making my way inside. I'm just at the entrance of the house when the deep roar of a large engine growls from behind me. Everyone turns to watch as a black SUV comes swinging around the trees. It's parked with skill opposite the other group of much less impressive cars. Unit Bravo ease out of it, and I realize my kidnapping case has just become a whole lot more complicated. Fra is the first to make it to me. You're surprised to see me again already? She chokes with a chuckle, slipping her fingers into mine to bring my hand up and planting a gentle kiss on my knuckles. A smile catches me before I can stop it at the easy gesture. Surprised to see you all. We both look to the others as they approach. Ava locking the car as she pushes a pair of sunglasses up her nose. I'm guessing you're not just here to check out the view. I rub at my forehead before glancing up at them, hoping for a moment they might just be a mirage. I'm not sure whether to be happy that they're not. I'm guessing you're not just here to check out the view, I say, my voice straining with slight hope. And you'd be correct, Detective, Ava states. She folds her arms, her head barely moving as she takes in the scene around us. We were alerted by the agency about the kidnapping. A young girl, right? Nat asks with a frown. I nod. Yes, Addie Jefferson. Why? That's all the agency told us, Farah explains. Morgan, from her place huddled in the only available shade, shoves a cigarette into her mouth as she nods at the house. There must be something going on here, more than just your boring police case. Wonderful, I exclaim, throwing my hands up before sucking in a breath and pinching at the bridge of my nose. This is just what I need. At least with us here you have more manpower at your disposal, Ava offers in consolation. Nat gives a nod. That's true. We can accomplish more faster if we split up and take different tasks. Who's going to decide those? Farah asks, a smile playing at the corners of her lips as her eyes begin to sparkle. Our almighty leader, Her head swivels towards me. Oh, my lovely detective here. It's Jules' crime scene. They should be the one to give tasks, Nat suggests. Ava barely even tenses at the suggestion. I agree. You're more than capable of dealing out the tasks at this scene, detective. Thank you, I reply, offering a grateful nod with the words. Farah's face screws up. What just happened here? It's called respect, Ava retorts with an arched brow. Whenever it's called, it ruined what could have been a glorious moment, the young vampire complains with her expression falling. Looking over the team and taking in the scene, I quickly made a mental list of the tasks that need accomplishing and decide who would be best at what. Well, at least I hope. The kidnapper's probably long gone at this stage. Sure, would be interesting to see where they went, but I think the most interesting part, especially considering what we've heard earlier about the parents potentially withholding information or not being fully clear about what they've seen, that's definitely the most interesting part to me, so we'll talk to her parents with Nat. I'll take Nat and we'll go talk to the parents. Apparently they haven't really said very much. It'll be good to see if we can get any more out of them, I say. Ava steps forward. I'll check the parameter of the scene. What about us? Morgan asks, stomping on the cigarette, which instantly putters out as it hits the mud. You can check out the girls' room. See if you can sense anything about the kidnapper, I suggest. Farah can check about the house and see if she can learn anything more about the family in general. Farah gives an enthusiastic nod. Good with me. There's a moment's pause as Morgan slides her gaze towards the team leader. Ava lets her arms fall back to her sides. And it's decided. That's apparently enough to satisfy Morgan. Everyone peels off to their own separate tasks, except for Nat. She stays behind, shoving her hands into the pockets of her faded dark jeans. Are you ready then? She asks. As ready as I'll ever be when talking to distraught parents, I mumble before turning to head inside the cabin. Nat follows close behind, dipping down to avoid knocking her head on the thick wood beam of the doorway. Inside the Jeffersons' cabin, there's the oddest sensation when entering the house, like walking out of the hot abundance of summer into rustic autumn inside. The open space of the combined living and dining rooms has bare stone walls framed by beams of redwood. The interior looks old but well kept, the towering ceiling above painted in a warm cream color. A definite scent of cedar and juniper envelops me as I walk farther inside, the smell wonderfully pleasant yet strange at this time of year. But the deceivingly calm aroma only makes the destruction that lies before us even more of a shock. The bare plank floor, once evidently decorated with rugs thrown artfully over the ground in themes of mustard yellows and umbers, is a wasteland of broken furniture. Nat and I do our best to tiptoe through the carnage, unable to completely avoid crunching shards of glass beneath our shoes as we go. Nat almost kicks a fallen shattered vase that's in her path. Amongst the mess is an arrangement of two burnt orange velvet sofas sitting opposite each other in the center of the room. On one of them sits Addie's parents. We shuffle closer and stand before them, but neither of them notices. Though they're sat side by side, both are completely lost, their eyes blank and shining with grief. A nice place you have. Well, used to be. Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson, I'm Detective Langford. I ask. I'm here to ask you some questions about what happened. Finally, Isa looks up. Her impossibly large eyes stare up at me. The dark brown of them almost black, the smudged eyeliner around them evidence of her crying. Oh, she mutters, her bottom lip shaking. She attempts to smooth back her frizz of cropped black hair before clearing her throat. We know, Nat interrupts, crouching down to meet her eyes and offering a sympathetic smile. But we really need to get a clearer picture of what happened here last night. It's the only way we can find Addie. At the mention of his daughter's name, Mark now pulls himself out of his thoughts, visibly flinching. You're going to find her? We're going to try, I reply. He rubs at his long, chapped, sunburnt nose while sniffing back further tears. Then, what do you want to know? As soon as we take a seat on the opposite sofa, both parents zero in on us with frightening precision. Mark narrows his eyes, drawing in his bottom lip as though tasting something in the air before sagging completely back against the sofa. You're a vampire, Nat smiles. Yes. Isa folds forwards, her ring-adorned fingers gripping at her hair with sheer relief as her head bows. We're with the agency, I explain, taking the cue that they're obviously more at ease around that than humans. We're here to help. There's a physical feel of tension draining from the atmosphere. My body lightens for a moment, and I enjoy the sensation in my tired limbs. Isa draws her gaze back up to land on me, her soft tan skin seeming to shimmer almost purple for a moment before it fades and she frowns. Then, what are you? You feel human, but... Nat side-eyes me with a very worried glance, so I decide to turn the conversation away from that particular topic. What really happened last night? I ask, notepad prepped in one hand, my pen in the other. Her daughter was kidnapped, Isa snarls. Mark reaches out to her, rubbing a hand across the top of her back. His lip quivers and he places his other hand over his mouth. Isa settles at the touch, once again lowering her head to stare at the ground, her body shaking. Her fingers clasp behind the back of her neck. I'm sorry, it's just... It's okay, Nat offers. We understand. We barely knew what was happening. One minute we were making dinner together. Addie was telling us she wanted to take up painting. Mark draws his hand back from his wife and wrings his hands together in his lap, eyes wet with tears at the sudden memories. He snaps his head back and forth. Then someone walked in. Both Nat and I stare at them. He walked in? She asks in clarification. Yes, the man just walked in. He shakes his head as though his memories are leading him astray. He was not like any supernatural I've ever seen before. Isa straightens so fast I almost flinch. The bastard actually apologized, came through the door and said he was sorry, but he needed... Her jaw stiffens before she eases the words out through clenched teeth. Needed our child. What then? I prompt when it seems they might fall into another silent melancholy. We fought him, Isa states as though it was obvious. She shakes her head, tears pressing at the corners of her eyes, even after she swipes them away with the back of her hand. We tried to fight him. A quick examination shows they have no wounds or defensive injuries. But it didn't work. Mark shakes his head slowly, his eyes wide as he stares at a spot in the distance. No, he didn't fight back, but nothing we tried would touch him. Nat and I pass a glance to each other at that, and I resist writing all of these details down in my station notepad. He just stood there looking sad. Isa continues, her face calm for a moment before anger jerks her entire body straight. If I ever find him... Her voice breaks and she crumples against her husband. The two ball up together, tears flowing freely once more, as pained sobs echo from between them. Nat rubs a hand at her eyes and has to turn away. I decide it's best if I take over for a while, knowing I'll likely only get one more question out of the couple before they break down completely. I mean, this is stupid. These two are both interesting. But, well, maybe they do. This is, they're both interesting. Why can I not ask both? I mean, we say we'll likely only get one more question. Now, I think in a real scenario, this would allow us to ask this question as well, while this question would have them break down and definitely not respond to any more questions. So I will ask this question, trusting in that Farah could potentially find out more about why that kidnapper might be after Abby, rather than them straight up telling us, because I'm not sure they fully trust us yet. So if it is some particular reason why the kidnapper would have particularly needed her, they might not even tell us in the first place. And if them ending up unconscious is somehow a consequence of the kidnapper's actions, which, I believe is probably the case, it could help us if we eventually have to face them ourselves. So I think this is more valuable information to us. The room was almost a map of what happened, broken furniture spreading outwards from the kitchen. A fight happened, but they don't have a wound between them. How did you both end up unconscious? I ask, scooting forwards on the seat. A bark of hollow laughter escapes Isa, then she lets out a sharp breath. He waited until we were exhausted. What do you mean? Nat asks. We fought him as soon as we knew he was after Addie, Mark clarifies, twisting his fingers together before rubbing a hand over his mouth. We threw everything we could at him, physically and magically, but it didn't touch him. Nat gives them the same surprised examination that I do, looking them over carefully and noting their lack of wounds. Did he fight back? Well, Nat, you should be paying attention. They've told us this already. No, not once, Mark mumbles. He just stood there and took it. I don't think anything we did hurt him. And then? I prompt, wanting to get as much information as I can. The edges of their voices are beginning to fray with grief once again. Eddie ran, but it was too late. Isa's voice breaks on the words. When he realized we had exhausted ourselves. Her forehead furrows, her dark brows drawing over her large eyes, which shine with sadness once again. I flip my pad closed, realizing maybe these details are best not noted down in a station notepad. He knocked you out? Yes, but not physically. It was some kind of spell, old magic. Very old. See, that's useful info. Mark adds, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. His body stoops forwards as he lets out a sob. Isa leans into him, drawing him into a tight embrace as her head rests against him. I look over at Nat with a small shake of my head, indicating we won't get much more from them. Nat tries to thank them for their help, but they don't hear. They're too lost in their sorrow. Leaving the parents to their grief, we make our way out of the house and come to a stop outside of the doorway. A rush of summer-warm air washes over us, and the scent of pine trees lingers on the breeze. It helps clear the emotion that trailed behind us after speaking with the parents. What do you think? I ask, turning away from the cabin and hoping the parents don't have hearing as sensitive as a vampire's. It's difficult to get a real read on them with my abilities diminished, Nat explains, nodding up at the rays of bright sunlight which filter through the treetops high above. But I can sense enough to know they're telling the truth. She gives a distant stare back towards her house. And scared. So scared. I agree. There were no signs of deception when they talked, I add. Nat seems relieved at my agreement. If this case is supernatural, it's going to make things really difficult to explain at the station, I reply, forcing a hand through my hair and gripping it with a groan. Nat places a hand on my shoulder. Leave that to Rebecca. Yeah, just give a nod to the idea, yeah. I give a simple nod at the suggestion. Sharing and delegating tasks is likely the only way we'll get through this. My train of thought is interrupted when the rest of Unit Bravo walk over to join us. Nat and I step farther away from the house to meet the others. How did you get on? I ask as we group up by a thick redwood tree that soars high above us. Morgan leans against the trunk, grimacing as the furry bark prods at her. I couldn't get much. Me either, Farah adds with an exaggerated shrug. Wasn't much to get, though it was a good excuse for snooping around. The comment gains a frown from Ava. What, you didn't think I would? Ava rolls her eyes. I also couldn't determine much. Whoever committed the crime was skilled. Well, we had more luck in finding out about him. Nat comments, looking over at me with a nod. The others shift their attention in my direction with expectant glances. The kidnapper was supernatural. I begin, slipping my notepad into my pocket as an excuse to take a moment to wrap my head around the idea. What kind of supernatural? Ava asks. They weren't sure, Nat replies, a pinch of pained frown tightening her features. She's obviously thinking of the poor parents. But whoever it was had no interest in anyone except the girl. Oh, my words, okay. My words only add to Nat's discomfort. He knocked out the parents. Knocked them out, Morgan repeats. If he didn't need them, why not kill them? Morgan, Nat exclaims, her voice pitching higher with shock. Ava looks over at her with a soft glance. You may not like it, but Morgan's point is valid. Morgan doesn't seem proud of this, only shying away from the bright sunlight with a grunt. It's true, I add. The parents fought back, but he apparently just stood and took it. Ava drops her gaze in thought at that. Nat shakes herself from her unease. The parents said he had old magic. That at least gives us somewhere to start. Ava nods. Staying at the scene won't provide much more for now. We should be going. The group begins moving away. Then I let out a small gasp as I'm suddenly yanked to one side and pulled behind a large tree. Farah grins at me as I end up with my back resting against a tree trunk. She shifts even closer as I drop my eyes to hold her sparkling gaze. What do you think you're doing? I'm barely able to hold back a chuckle as I ask the question. She runs a hand up my arm before resting it against my neck. Getting some time with you before they drag me away again. I roll my lips together at her touch. Aren't we supposed to be working? She drops her hand from my neck and places it on my hip, leaning closer until our faces are only an inch apart. Oh, this is totally working for me, babe, she replies with a soft smile that steals my breath away. We're waiting for her. A wave of wanting flushes over me. Farah waits until I give a small dip of my head before leaning closer. Her lips brush over mine with the softest touch, and I moan just at the mere contact. The hint of a smile tugs at her features when she hears it. Then she presses her lips over mine, and I shiver as her hands wander up my back before rising to cup my face. The kiss is soft, but at the same time deep. There's a connection in it that draws us closer until not even a breath of air could pass between our bodies. I curl my fingers into her shirt, and she accepts the invitation. Her mouth abandons mine, and a small gasp of disappointment leaves me. But the gasp turns to a moan as she places her lips on my neck. She caresses the curve of my throat with her lips, tracing all the way to my collarbone. I willingly arc my head back so that she can reach further. Okay. She breathes my name against my skin, and I have to grasp the tree behind me to keep from melting completely. Fra, we really should be leaving. Nat calls from the car, hidden from our view by the thick trunk we're propped against. Don't listen to that. Farah murmurs, going in for another kiss that truly does have me forgetting about anything but the taste of her. Hear you panting behind there? Morgan yells a moment later, and Nat doesn't look very happy about it. Farah draws away with a huff of annoyance, her eyes closed. Sometimes I hate her. I chuckle, the sound a little hoarse as I try to find my voice. You don't really mean that. No, you're right, I don't, she replies with a shrug and a grin, still catching her breath. I'll see you later. I nod. She bounces forwards to kiss my cheek. Drawing her gaze slowly over me, she gives a very approving purr, then sprints towards the SUV. I watch after her, hoping my heart will calm down before it rockets out of my ribs. At the SUV. Farah, someone who often smiles, is now grinning so much her cheeks ache, and she doesn't care. Can there be a better reason to smile than Jules? She answers her own question with a shake of her head. Nothing can spoil my day now. She almost bangs into what she assumes is a tree, but it turns out to be Farah. Ava. Read one word ahead. Farah blows out a puff of air. Oh wait, there it is. What? Ava asks, her arms already folded, bulging with muscle that once used to be so intimidating to Farah. Farah grins at the team leader. Nothing. So, here to scold me? Let me find a seat first. My feet ache. Ava rolls her eyes. I'm not going to scold you. How could I do such a thing when you're clearly so happy? Her arms drop back to her sides. I would never want to take that from you, Farah. A knot of guilt forms in Farah's stomach. Sorry. But as pleased as I am to see you so bright when we're on a mission, I know, don't worry. Farah gives a shrug before patting her hands on either one of Ava's biceps. I won't let you down. The team leader arches a brow before nodding. Let's get going. Farah bounds towards the car door, glances over her shoulder towards Jules once more, and then climbs into the car with a flutter in her chest. Back at the crime scene. The gaggle of young police volunteers that arrived not long ago are already inside, doing their best to document every inch of the house with bright camera flashes and yellow tags. Deciding it's best to stay out of their way, I turn, jostling a bush in the process. I watch as something floats out of the clutches of its branches. The object floats to the ground slowly, swaying in the air and capturing my full attention. It's a feather, a very large feather, at least the size of my forearm. I tug on a glove and crouch down, delicately pinching the feather by its end to bring it up in front of my face. It gleams with a shimmering metallic sheen as the dappled light catches it. It's surprisingly thick and tough considering it's so light. My thoughts roam as to where it could have come from, my gaze shifting upwards to the trees above where birds flutter between the branches, but none of the birds are anywhere near big enough to have produced this. With my curiosity piqued, I slide the feather into an evidence bag before hiding it inside my coat. The volunteers chatter louder from in the house, and I take that as a signal that they're nearly done. I move inside, ready to finish up with the scene. Next chapter.